combination of a surge in the unemployment rate and lower inflation in the US combined to send share markets soaring. The Reserve Bank warns that house prices and rents aren't coming down anytime soon. And the story of Australia's hidden top 20 company. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Friday, the 17th of May, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Getting towards the end of a very, very busy week.
Can't believe we're nearly at the end of budget week. It feels like it's just flown by.
Yeah, it's so much going on. I think my voice needs a rest, to be honest.
Should make the weekend edition tomorrow very interesting then, if you have to stay silent the whole time.
I'll recover, I promise.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Look, after the show, you have an interview coming up with Stephen Fennick, who is the editor of techguide.com.au. This is a great chat.
It is. So we take the three buzz phrases around the place at the moment, one being virtual reality, another being artificial intelligence, and the third one being quantum computing. And we ask Stephen not just what they mean, but how they affect us everyday consumers. So it is a great chat about where those technologies are up to and how they'll actually apply to our everyday life. Now, Stephen's a great fella, knows a lot about technology and communicates very well. So well worth the listen, this one.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's coming up after the show. The main story this morning, Sean, the unemployment rate jumped to 4.1% last month following a surge in people looking for work.
The unemployment rate was a surprise given the number of people employed actually grew by 38,500 according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Both the growth in employment and the unemployment rate, the growth in the unemployment rate, were higher than economists had expected. The March unemployment number was also revised upwards to 3.9%. The influx of job seekers, along with an unusually high number of people who had been offered a new job but were waiting to start, led to a sharp 30,000 rise in the number of people classified as unemployed in that month. They've come back on board. These numbers demonstrate that the data jumps around a fair bit, and the message, Michael, in economics is always the trend is your friend. Hence, what's the trend in the unemployment rate doing? Well, it's trending higher. It isn't really a surprise. In fact, what has caught the government and the Reserve Bank unawares is how well the labour market's done. That helped the government deliver a budget surplus for this financial year, some benefit there. But April's employment gains were driven by a 44,600 increase in part-time workers, which more than offset a 6,100 drop in full-time employment. The high migration rates pushed the participation rate to a near record high of 66.7%.
Sean, it's really been a heck of a week in the economics world, hasn't it? We've had the federal budget, which was slightly inflationary, although the CPI rate will fall later in the year. We had yesterday's labour force figures, but we've also had US inflation figures come in lower than expected. Put it all into, what do we always say? The
mixed master.
Yeah,
yes,
there we go.
Yes.
And what spews out of the other side in terms of interest rates?
Firstly, nothing spews out of a mixed master, Michael.
Well, if you've overfilled it.
Maybe. Financial markets, following everything that's happened in the past 3 days, have no longer priced in any chance of a rate hike here in Australia. The next move, according to traders, will be down, and that could happen at the end of this year. Bond traders have now priced in a 50% chance of that happening by the end of December. Certainly, given inflation figures in the US, which I'll talk about shortly, it seems likely that there'll be a rate cut in the world's biggest economy later this year, probably too. Now, all that has helped equity markets. It's also pushed the Aussie dollar higher. In fact, the Aussie dollar almost made it to 67 US cents yesterday, Michael. The Aussie dollar did something. That's the other way of putting that. Almost. Bottom line in all this, Michael, at the end of the week is that we can be more confident that the next move in rates is down, and it might even happen this year.
Oh, that is good news. Local markets, how did they perform yesterday?
Sea of green, Michael, a sea of green. Everyone was out there excited.
God, you are a sucker for a cliche sometimes, aren't you?
Yes. The S&P ASX 200 closed up 1.7% to 7,881 points after a surge on Wall Street. Those unemployment figures helped out too. Between the news on rates in the US and the unemployment figures, equity investors kind of became convinced that rates could well fall later this year. And of course, lower interest rates is good for earnings. Interest rate sensitive stocks rose most. Goodman Group was up 4.6%. WiseTech Global jumped to 4.2%. Now, of course, that's the property sector lead and the tech sector lead, and it was those two sectors that did best yesterday. Really, though, all the large caps were higher with the exception of the two energy groups, Woodside and Santos. National Australia Bank and ANZ led the banks higher, both up more than 2%. Macquarie was up nearly 3%. The big miners were higher, so to the retailers, Transurban, Telstra, blah, blah, blah. The list just goes on. Quickly, Michael, in corporate news, the bidding war for Nimoy cotton has been hit by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission saying a sale to France's Louis Dreyfus would substantially lessen competition. That certainly takes the wind out of the sails of that little bidding war. It sent Nimoy's share price lower, certainly put Singapore's Olam in the box seat. Problem, of course, is that Louis Dreyfus already owns almost 17% of Nimoy. So we'll see how that one works out.
Indeed, we will. Now, checking international markets thanks to Blue Chip Communication, the experts helping financial services companies market, communicate, and grow. Visit bluechipcommunication.com.au. And Sean, tell us about those US inflation figures.
Well, Wall Street hit a record high and bond yields tumbled after a slowdown in inflation in the world's largest economy reinforced hopes that the Fed will cut interest rates in the second half of this year. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy costs, rose 0.3%, snapping a run of above expected readings. As a result, the S&P 500 hit its 23rd record this year. Pretty amazing, isn't it?
That is outstanding, isn't it? You're just at that point you start to not get excited about records, don't you?
Yeah,
23rd record.
We wouldn't even have had 23 weeks in the year yet.
That's a very good point.
Anyway, the data provides hope that inflation is resuming its downward trend, which would open the way for interest rate cuts. There are also figures showing some softening in consumer demand in the US. Anyway, it was very much a market-moving day the past 24 hours between US information, local unemployment, lots of stuff going on.
We're in week 20 at the moment.
So did you hear what I said in the last, minute?
No.
I
was counting weeks.
I was doing some of my best stuff there, Michael, and you ignored me. I expected you to say something and you just came back, it's week 20.
Oh, it is really, Sean, the only place I can add value is these little kind of tidbits of information that either I calculate with a scrap of paper counting out the weeks or I Google.
Right. Good. Which one was that one? Google?
That was Google. I'm ashamed to admit that one. All right. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the Reserve Bank expects house prices and rents to keep rising for some time, saying a perfect storm has prevented the construction industry from building more homes, even though there is plenty of demand spurred on by migration and working from home.
Reserve Bank Chief Economist Sarah Hunter said there is no quick fix for Australia's housing market woes as developers defer projects due to high costs. It's pretty simple. Supply and demand. Plenty of the latter and not enough of the former. Normally, high demand will trigger a jump in construction, but a few things have gotten in the way over the past couple of years, Dr. Hunter said. The industry was already struggling to get through its pipeline of residential projects that commenced during the pandemic on the back of the Home Builder program. Finishing trades are in short supply, and the cost of building a new home is up 40% since 2019. That's caused some developers and investors to delay or scrap projects because they're just no longer viable, no longer economic. Dr. Hunter added that supply and demand, much more than interest rates, determined how many homes were built. And because of this issue around supply, we are still going to have higher prices, higher rents, for some time to come.
Sean, the government and the Greens have agreed to pass a slew of legislation, including changes to the petroleum resource rent tax before Parliament rises for the end of budget week.
So maybe you could possibly just Google collective noun for legislation, do you think?
Already on it, Sean.
Yeah, good. Vehicle emission standards changes, new offshore gas approval rules and changes stemming from the PwC tax leaks scandal will pass the Senate. As part of the deal, Labor has agreed to carve out proposed new powers for the Resources Minister to set rules related to offshore gas production. Also yesterday, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese criticised backbench Labor Senator Fatima Payman after she recited the, quote, "from the river to the sea," end quote, slogan, which has been condemned as anti-Semitic. The government was forced to back a coalition Senate motion that implicitly criticised Senator Payman by calling on senators to refrain from inflammatory and divisive comments. Senator Payman avoided the vote in the Senate. Now, on Wednesday, she sparked a fracture within Labor over the Middle East war by accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. That triggered Mr. Albanese's response yesterday.
Sean, while we're talking politics, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison and presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump are unlikely bedfellows, I suppose. I use that word very, very cautiously, but close they are, really. The former PM visiting Mr. Trump in New York. There's some fantastic photos of the two of them posing together and calling the current legal battles involving the former president a pile-on.
Mr. Morrison met Mr. Trump at his private residence and afterwards said America's legal system risks damaging its reputation and being viewed as similar to those in developing nations that are politically compromised. Mr. Trump is leading Democrat President Joe Biden in the polls. Of course, the US votes in November, but Mr. Trump also faces more than 90 criminal charges across 4 separate cases. The current running trial in New York involves allegations of approving a payment to bury a porn actor's story of a sexual encounter before it could derail his 2016 campaign. Mr. Morrison said Mr. Trump indicated support for the AUKUS submarine deal during the meeting. The former PM is in the US launching his book, Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's testimony of God's faithfulness. Now, some of the guests helping him launch that are actually former Trump staffers, former Vice President Mike Pence and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Air Vanuatu administrators say the airline was, quote, clearly not in a position to meet its financial commitments well before it collapsed earlier this month, owing more than $99 million to customers, staff and lenders in full.
Liquidator Ernst & Young said Air Vanuatu had a high cost base for the size of its operations and a significant level of debt. Now, the carrier had been supported financially by the government of Vanuatu. Air Vanuatu flew to Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Auckland, as well as Nandi in Fiji and Noumea in New Caledonia. Also operated a small domestic flight. It fell into liquidation a week ago, cancelling a bunch of flights, and it doesn't look good for that airline. Very similar to Bonza, really.
Sean, Incitec's share price hit a year high, even though the group lost money over the last 6 months.
Yes, it announced an interim loss of $148 million on the back of impairments from its fertilisers business, which were only partly offset by the sale of its Waggaman ammonia manufacturing facility in the US. Investors, though, focused on underlying gains of 18% and talks to offload the fertiliser business. Now, Incitec is in negotiations for the sale of that business with an Indonesian group.
Another stock to do well yesterday, we mentioned this at the top of the show, was gaming machine maker Aristocrat Leisure. Its share price jumped 12% after a big increase in net profit.
Yeah, fascinating company, this one. Its half-year net profit was up 16%, and that triggered a higher dividend for shareholders and a $350 million boost to its share buyback program. Aristocrat started in 1965. A guy called Len Ainsworth started the company. It was then split and his boys took over. Len Ainsworth started his own company then that was also listed. Nowadays, Aristocrat has 3 arms: traditional gaming machines, things you find in pubs, clubs and casinos; online social, where no money's involved; and online real money games. It's doing really well in the US slot machine market. Effectively, it rents out its machines and then takes a cut of the money that's put through them. There was also a highly successful launch of 6 NFL-branded games, which Chief Executive Troy Croker said was the biggest launch in the company's history, according to the Financial Review. They were slot machine games that have done really well in the US. In the social gaming division, which is called Pixel United, a 17% increase in profit was driven by growth in Aristocrat's market share in social and the continued success of a role-playing video game called Raid Shadow Legends. Now, do you know anything about this one, Michael?
I don't, but I suspect you're about to tell me.
So a player enters a fantasy world and goes on quests involving lords, barbarians, demon spawn, elves, and others. There you go.
Well, Sean, if I had to pick one for you, it is Sean, Demon Spawn, Aylmer. I mean, it just rolls off the tongue. It even rhymes.
You are Michael the Barbarian, I think.
I suspect so. I mean, that sounds tough as heck.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, mind you, Aristocrat comes up with this. This is a company that's given you an 800% share price return over the last 10 years. It's the 17th largest company on the ASX. Quite amazing, really. And it would easily be the least known top 20 company. Like we all know the banks and the miners and the retailers and all that. Aristocrat Leisure, a demon of a company.
Oh, Sean, you demon spawn, you. This has got Sleeper Story written all over it for the weekend edition, wouldn't you say?
I might take it. I'll take it. Thanks very much.
I suggested it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, savage. This is how you got the nickname Demon Spawn. Do not miss the weekend edition tomorrow. It is a competitive environment between me and Sean, and our Fear and Greed colleague Adam Lang adjudicates us, and it is a lot of fun. We do enjoy it.
It is.
Indeed.
He referees well, Adam. He referees well.
He has a very, very tough job, doesn't he? All right, turning to international news now, Sean, and Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, is fighting for his life after being shot in public, the first assassination attempt on a European leader in more than 2 decades.
The 59-year-old was rushed to hospital following an attack by a 71-year-old man who police believe had a clear political motivation. Mr. Fico has been the dominant political figure in the Eastern European nation of 5.4 million since the fall of communism. His return to power last year reflects opposition in the country to European Union institutions in Brussels, and his Russia-friendly stance has put him at odds with partners threatening to undermine EU unity in helping Ukraine.
And finally, Sean, France has declared a state of emergency in its Pacific territory of New Caledonia as it seeks to quell deadly riots sparked by a controversial electoral reform.
4 people, including 1 police officer, have died in unrest that has raged this week, despite the deployment of extra police and imposition of a curfew, according to the Financial Times. French President Emmanuel Macron condemned the unacceptable violence and called for the resumption of talks to negotiate a political solution to the crisis. Declaring a state of emergency allows the government to restrict certain freedoms without judicial review, including banning protests, limiting travel and carrying out searches.
All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. It's a great one today, speaking with Stephen Fennick, editor of techguide.com.au.
All about the 3 buzz phrases at the moment: artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and virtual reality.
Yeah, it's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, which is also where you can sign up for the Fear and Greed weekly newsletter. Head along, pop your email address in, and the newsletter comes out mid-morning on a Wednesday. So you've got a bit of time, but get in now, so don't forget. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 17th of May, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.